The first light of a Houston morning doesn't ease its way in. It burns. It comes hard over the flat edge of the city, blazing off glass towers and turning the bayou into hammered copper. And by the time most of that city is still sleeping, Mara Donovan was already on the 38th floor of the Meridian Tower, standing at her desk, in the pale gray quiet before the building filled with noise. She hadn't even set down her coffee. Because there, centered perfectly on her keyboard, where nothing had been when she left the night before, sat a battered spiral notebook. The kind with the black and white marbled cover. The kind petroleum engineers lug into the field. Weathered at the corners. A red pen clipped to the wire spine. She didn't touch it immediately. She stood there reading the outside first. No name, no label, just a yellow sticky note on the cover that read, "Read page 14. Read it before you sign anything." She opened to page 14. What she found wasn't handwritten notes. It was a printed document, a copy of the merger agreement she was set to present to shareholders in 4 days. Identical to the one locked in her secure drive, except this one had been annotated. 3 paragraphs circled. Clause 8.4 boxed in red ink with 3 words written beside it in heavy, deliberate print. "This is a trap." And below that, in the same hand, "If you sign this, Donovan Energy won't belong to you anymore. The voting rights go offshore. You become the face of a company someone else controls." Mara's fingers tightened around the edge of the page. The paper felt slightly cool, like it had been printed in the last few hours. But that wasn't possible. This document lived on a server with 3-layer encryption and access logs monitored by legal. No one outside the merger committee had seen this draft. No one except... She pressed the intercom. "Marcus?" Her voice came out level. "I need a full security sweep. Pull every camera feed on this floor from 11 p.m. onward. I want to know who came into this office." "Copy that, Miss Donovan. On it." 8 minutes later, Marcus Webb was in her doorway with 2 compliance officers and a tablet, his broad frame filling the frame with the kind of calm that only comes from having seen everything twice. Mara leaned over the screen. The footage was clean. Time stamped 1:47 a.m. A man in a gray custodial uniform moved through the executive floor steady, unhurried. He emptied a trash bin, wiped down the credenza, paused for just a moment near the bookshelf where a framed photo of Mara and her father sat. Then he set the notebook down on her keyboard and walked out. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. "Who is he?" Mara asked. "Cal Reyes," Marcus said. "Night shift custodian. Started here about 5 months ago. Quiet. Keeps to himself." Nothing flagged. Mara straightened. "Bring him up." Cal Reyes walked into her office the way a man walks into a room when he's already decided it won't shake him. He was lean, broad through the shoulders, his dark hair threaded with gray at the temples. His uniform was clean. His hands were steady. But his eyes were the kind that had been somewhere harder than this and hadn't looked away. Mara didn't offer him a seat. "That notebook," she said. "That's a confidential merger document. Who gave you access to it?" Cal looked at her evenly. "Nobody gave me anything. I didn't need access to recognize when a company is about to be hollowed out from the inside." The room temperature dropped 1/2 degree. "I didn't ask for your interpretation," she said sharp. "I asked how you got it." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "You ever check the waste basket next to the secondary copier on 36? She didn't answer. "People print test drafts," he said. "Then they think they've deleted the print job and throw the pages away. What they don't realize is that crumpled paper in a trash bin tells the same story as the document locked on the server, sometimes cleaner." He folded his hands. "I read it, and I recognized the architecture, the offshore routing, the split voting trust. I've seen it built before." "By whom?" "By people who understood that the cleanest way to take something is to make the owner think they're still in charge." Mara's jaw tightened. And I'm supposed to believe the night janitor just reads merger agreements and identifies corporate fraud. Something moved through his expression. Not offense. Closer to patience, worn thin. I used to be a forensic accountant at Meridian and Cole, he said quietly. Senior level. In 2018, I filed an internal warning about a $420 million misstatement in their Gulf asset portfolio. Presented it to 3 senior partners. Put my name on every page. He paused. No one acted on it. The firm collapsed 14 months later. I lost my position, my reputation, and about everything else. The name landed like a brick dropped onto marble. Meridian and Cole. Mara knew it. Everyone in the Houston Energy Corridor knew the story, a forensic report that had circulated anonymously through the industry after the collapse so precise it had prompted 3 federal inquiries. An analysis that read like someone had walked through the ruins and labeled every broken load-bearing wall. No one had ever claimed authorship. She looked at him differently now. Not with trust. Not yet. But the question forming behind her eyes was new. You have proof, she said, about Clause 8.4. Not enough to take to court, he admitted, but enough to know that if you sign it voting rights in Donovan Energy, get funneled into a Cayman-registered trust, you keep the title, you lose the wheel. She held his gaze. Who put it in there? Cal didn't blink. The only person with the system access and the institutional knowledge to slip a clause into a draft without triggering a compliance flag. Someone who's been inside your walls long enough to know where the blind spots are. The silence stretched. Derek, she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. He simply said, I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm here because I watched a firm burn once when I stayed quiet. I don't want to watch another one. Mara turned away for a moment, looking out at the Houston skyline coming fully into the morning. Derek Strand, 12 years by her side. The man who had pitched this merger like it was the culmination of everything they'd built together. She remembered saying to him not long ago, My nightmare isn't losing money, Derek. It's losing control. And he had laughed and put his hand on her shoulder and said, Then let me handle the complexity so you can stay focused on the vision. She turned back. Go back to your shift, she said. You're not fired, but you don't leave the building during work hours, not until I sort out what I'm looking at. Cal nodded once. Wasn't planning to. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Miss Donovan, I know what you're risking by even entertaining this. I know what it costs to believe a man with a mop over a man with a corner office. Then why tell me? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because if I stay silent again, I'll have nothing left to teach my daughter. That stopped her. She looked at him, really looked. A man who had once occupied the same altitude of intellect as anyone in this building, reduced by the world's judgment to cleaning its floors. But his spine hadn't bent. And somewhere in the space between his words, something shifted in her. Not trust. Not yet. Just a question that wouldn't close. What if he's right? The lobby of Donovan Energy hummed with its usual controlled energy. Polished boots on polished stone. The low percussion of portfolio cases. The espresso bar running at full capacity filling the atrium with the smell of dark roast and urgency. And through it all, one man moved unseen. Cal Reyes pushed his custodial cart past the finance wing eye's forward pace, even. In the back pocket of his uniform, folded flat and worn at the creases, was a photocopy of the field notebook page. He didn't look at the executives who passed him. He'd once been them. He understood precisely how invisible the people serving them were allowed to be. A security guard he knew by sight nodded as he passed. Big week, huh, Cal? Cal gave a half smile. Every week's big when someone's trying to sell the building out from under you. The guard blinked. Cal kept walking. Upstairs, Mara sat alone in the executive conference room with a tablet propped in front of her. Security had sent her the full camera file. She'd watched the clip 6 times now. Cal placing the notebook. No hesitation, no surveillance of the room. The behavior of a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying too long. She hadn't told Graham. She hadn't told legal. She hadn't even told her assistant. She tapped play on her own voice memo from 2 weeks ago, a late-night dictation she'd made while reviewing the merger draft. Her own voice came back to her. Clause 8.4 restructures the oversight mechanism indirect, but it shifts the weight. I need to understand who benefits from the simplified governance model before I sign anything. She had flagged it, then gotten buried under 100 other fires and let it go. The door opened. Derek Strand walked in wearing a slate-gray suit that cost more than Cal made in 2 months. His smile was immediate and warm, the kind that arrived before he decided whether the room deserved it. "You needed me," he said, settling into a chair with the ease of a man who owned the furniture. Mara closed the tablet. "Walk me through the ownership structure post-merger, specifically the governance alignment under 8.4. Derek's smile didn't flicker. "We covered that in the committee review you signed off. I'm asking you to walk me through it again." A half-second pause. She caught it. "The Oversight Trust consolidates decision authority for efficiency," he said smoothly. "Standard structure in deals this size. Legal architected it." "Who drafted 8.4 specifically?" "That would have gone through the finance subcommittee. I can pull the drafting log." She looked at him steadily. "Please do. And Derek," she let the pause sit, "has anything changed since our last conversation about the deal? Anything I should know before I stand in front of 300 shareholders and put my name on this?" Derek laughed, light, easy, performative. "Mara, you're the founder. You're the face. This merger amplifies everything you've already built. Nothing has changed." His eyes were comfortable. His voice was comfortable. But there was something behind both that wasn't. She smiled back. She didn't believe him for a second. That evening, Cal sat in the janitor's supply closet on the 3rd-floor door, cracked the overhead fluorescent humming above him. He'd taken out a fresh notebook, not the field notebook, a plain yellow legal pad, and was writing in the careful shorthand of a man who'd been taught that documentation was armor. Clause 8.4 offshore trust routing. Voting split. Strand potential trustee. Need confirmation on Cayman registration. A soft knock. He opened the door. Lily stood there in a blue raincoat, her backpack half unzipped, holding a crumpled drawing in one hand and a chocolate chip granola bar in the other. "Miss Evelyn said I could come find you." She pushed inside and climbed up onto an upturned bucket. "I got tired of coloring the same butterfly." He crouched to her level. "You were supposed to stay in the break room, Lil." She handed him the drawing. It was a stick figure family him-her, and a new figure. A woman in a dark jacket, straight posture, eyes that were big even in crayon. "Is that supposed to be the lady from this morning?" Lily said, taking a bite of the granola bar. "The one on the news photo downstairs." She looked scared, but like she was trying not to show it. Cal studied the drawing. "She's the CEO, Lily. She doesn't scare easy." Lily tilted her head, chewing thoughtfully. "Maybe not of things outside, but maybe of herself." She pointed at the drawing. "I gave her a small smile, because I think underneath she has one." Cal didn't say anything. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his breast pocket. Upstairs, Mara stood at the window, the city lights beginning to come on across the flat Houston dark. She hadn't turned on the lamps. Darkness helped her think, always had. Her mentor, the man who'd hired her out of a land rights negotiation she'd won at 26, had told her once, "Power isn't about control, Mara. It's about knowing what you're willing to lose and deciding it's worth it." That sentence had lived in her chest for 15 years. Tonight, it ached. She whispered it to no one. "What am I willing to lose?" Down in the parking structure, Cal loaded Lily into the back seat of his dented Civic and paused before starting the engine, looking back at the tower. The lit windows stacked up like a question he didn't have the answer to yet. "Dad?" Lily's voice came from under her blanket. "Did you tell her the truth?" "Yeah." "Then it doesn't matter if she believes it yet." She burrowed deeper. "Truth doesn't need permission to be true." Cal looked at her in the rearview mirror for a long moment. Then he turned the key. The engine caught and something else caught with it, the beginning of a storm that had only just decided to move. The morning arrived like a held breath. Mara moved through it on autopilot elevator executive floor coffee she didn't taste. Her schedule was stacked merger press previews, board sign-offs, a risk mitigation briefing. But her mind had one fixed point, Clause 8.4, and the man who'd warned her about it. 3 floors below Cal was back in his uniform mop, moving in steady arcs across the operations level tile. He moved the way he always moved, quietly at the margins of everyone's attention. But today, the margin had changed its meaning. "Hey, Reyes!" A voice from the IT corridor. Doug, one of the network technicians, jogged toward him holding a folded yellow notepad. "Found this by the loading dock. Figured it looked important." Cal took it. His handwriting, the shorthand notes on Strand on the trust structure on the Cayman routing. He'd left it near the service elevator. Could have been found by anyone. "Didn't read it," Doug said with a shrug. "Thought you might want it back." Cal managed a nod. His hands didn't fully stop shaking for 5 minutes after Doug walked away. Upstairs, the morning briefing was already assembling in the executive lounge when Mara's step faltered. Near the window, a little girl sat cross-legged on a velvet chair, swinging her feet, drawing with a purple crayon on the back of a printed agenda. Her ponytail was slightly crooked. Her sneakers were 2 different colors, one red, one green, worn with total confidence. The receptionist hurried over, whispering apologies. "I'm so sorry, Miss Donovan. Mr. Reyes's daughter, her school had an emergency closure this morning. He didn't want to leave her alone. He asked if she could stay in the break room, but she wandered." Mara raised a hand. "It's all right. What's her name?" "Lily." The girl looked up. Her eyes were bright and evaluating the way a child's eyes are when no one's bothered to teach them to perform otherwise. "You're the boss lady," she said. "No question mark on it." Mara tilted her head. "I suppose I am." "You don't look as scary as my dad said." Lily squinted. "He said you look like someone who doesn't believe in sleep." The receptionist made a small sound of distress. Mara nearly choked. "Did he?" Lily nodded with great seriousness. "He also said your eyes look like you're doing math even when you're not. But I think that just means you care a lot." She tilted her head. "You should smile more, though. Your face gets better when you do." Something moved inside Mara, quiet, surprising, like a pressure valve releasing an ounce of everything she'd been holding. She crouched down beside the chair. "What are you drawing?" Lily held up the page without ceremony. A house rendered in vivid purple, big windows, a yard, a tree. "It's not a real house," Lily said. "It's a safe one." Mara paused. "Safe from what?" Lily looked at her with the directness that only 8-year-olds retain. "From people who smile when they're lying." Mara didn't speak for a full 3 seconds. Then she stood, took one last look at the drawing, and walked out. Back at her desk, she pulled up the internal contract archive, searched for Clause 8.4 in the document metadata. The original file wasn't in the standard drafting log. It had been routed through an old compliance tag mislabeled as a procedural memo buried under routine filings from 3 quarters ago. Only someone with elevated clearance and a deep familiarity with the system's architecture would have known where to hide it. She called legal. "I need a full metadata trace on every modification made to the merger draft in the last 120 days. Quiet. No flags. Don't run it through the standard review channel." Understood, Miss Donovan. A few hours. She hung up, opened her voice memo app by instinct, and heard her own voice from 2 weeks back. If this backfires, it's on me. I can't keep pretending I see everything just because I'm not allowed to blink. She didn't remember saying it out loud, but the truth of it hit like something she'd always known and kept rescheduling. Late that afternoon, Cal was passing through the copy room on the second floor when something in the output tray caught his eye. A page, half sticking out. He paused, looked at it. A draft memo from D. Strand. Subject Transition Protocol, Post-Merger, Governance, Realignment. The language was careful, corporate, plausibly deniable. But the meaning to someone who'd spent a decade decoding exactly this kind of document was a floodlight on a dark road. Transfer of voting blocks to a holding trust. Oversight authority. Consolidated for efficiency. A timeline that aligned precisely with the merger close date. Corporate sleight of hand constructed by someone who understood that the best forgery doesn't look like a forgery. It looks like paperwork. Cal slid the page into his notebook. Then he did something he hadn't let himself do in almost 4 years. He opened his email, typed a new message, addressed it to m.donovan@dovanenergy.com. Subject line: What we pretend not to see. I don't expect trust. I barely have the right to ask for it. But I think you're starting to see it now, the shape of what's been done and who did it. Look at the metadata tags. Look at who last accessed the compliance archive template. The memo in the second floor copy tray isn't a coincidence. Nothing about this has been. CR. He sent it, closed the laptop, and that night in her darkened office, Mara read it twice. She didn't respond. But she didn't delete it either. 1 floor below, Cal mopped the marble floors of the Meridian Tower lobby, unaware that 40 feet above him, the woman he'd thrown a lifeline to was finally quietly deciding to grab it. And in a corner near the security desk, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing a new picture. 3 stick figures this time, holding hands, 1 tall one, medium, 1 small. In the corner of the page in her blocky, slightly lopsided print, she had written, "Truth is what makes a place safe." And across the building in 2 separate rooms, 2 people who had both been broken by silence felt something stir. Not certainty, not quite trust. Something younger than that. The seed of it. Houston looked like a grid of lit amber from the 38th floor. Mara stood at the floor-to-ceiling window arms crossed, watching the city without really seeing it. In her hand was a printout of Cal's email. What unsettled her wasn't the information she'd been pulling that thread herself all day. It was the tone. Not urgent. Not desperate. Unwavering. The voice of someone who had already paid the price for being honest and decided to pay it again anyway. She pressed the intercom. Send Cal Reyes to the 38th floor. He arrived 10 minutes later, still in his uniform, the faint antiseptic smell of the cleaning supplies on his sleeves. But his presence felt different than it had this morning, like a man who'd stopped trying to disappear. "Sit down," she said, nodding to the chair across her desk. He sat. No performance of hesitation, no performance of ease. She slid a folder toward him. I pulled the metadata logs. Derek's name appears 3 times. Once on the compliance archive when 8.4 was filed, once when the clause was relabeled, and once last week on permission settings. She watched him. You already suspected this. Cal looked at the folder but didn't open it. I didn't know, but I've learned to recognize the smell of rot even when someone's laid gold leaf over it. She exhaled, pressing 2 fingers to her temple. I built this company from next to nothing, she said quietly. Every deal, every contract, every partnership, all of it built on the conviction that if I didn't stay ahead of everyone, they'd take it from me. She stopped. And now the threat isn't coming from outside. It's coming from the man you trusted most, Cal said. She looked at him. I need to stop this before the shareholder summit, but I can't move on Derek without solid ground. The board already thinks I'm too cautious. If I accuse my own COO without ironclad proof, they'll call it a breakdown. He leaned forward slightly. Forward. Then let me help you get the ground. The silence between them was careful. I can authorize a temporary consultancy role, she said finally. Off book. You'll have the access you need to trace this properly. But if it leaks, if Derek figures out what we're doing, we both go down. Cal nodded once. I've been down. I'll bring a flashlight this time. She almost smiled. Almost. That night, Cal sat at his kitchen table with his old laptop open, Lily long asleep in the next room. He worked through merger documents, subsidiary filings, and offshore registry records, his fingers moving with a fluency that had nothing to do with janitorial work. His brain sharper than it had been in years, awake in the way it used to be back when the work mattered, and the truth mattered, and he hadn't yet learned what it cost to say so. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line. They know what you're doing. Walk away. He stared at the screen, then deleted it. Truth had always been dangerous. He'd known that. What he'd underestimated once was that silence was fatal. He wasn't making that mistake again. The next morning, Mara walked into the board's legal committee meeting. Derek was already there, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled, performing relaxation with the precision of a man who had performed it his whole life. He stood when she entered. You look rested, he said. Looks can be assembled, she replied. Their eyes held for a second longer than usual. Behind his easy expression, something calculated ran just beneath the surface, the same thing she'd caught before the thing she'd spent 12 years allowing herself to dismiss. I'm bringing in an outside consultant, she said, taking her seat. Independent audit. Sanity check before final signatures. Derek's smile tightened by 1 degree. Paranoia doesn't suit you, Mara. She looked at him across the table. No, but neither does betrayal. A silence that cost him something. She moved on to the agenda. That afternoon, Cal, dressed in simple khakis and a button-down, sat in front of a secure terminal in a small glass office marked Temp Consultant Strategic Risk. His building badge updated his coffee still in his hand. He muttered under his breath as the archive loaded. Let's see what ghosts you left behind. He combed through 3 years of filed documents. Merger statements, subsidiary structures, time-stamped approvals, scrolled past layers of deliberate bureaucratic fog, and then 90 minutes buried inside a folder labeled Deferred Liabilities 2022. He found it. A single Excel file, 8 months old, detailing a transfer of equity rights to a Cayman Islands shell entity timed to close concurrent with the merger date. Listed trustee Derek Strand. Cal sat back. He'd expected to find it. Had told himself he expected to find it. But staring at a man's name on a document like this spelled out in plain type, no ambiguity left, still landed like a fist. That evening, Lily climbed into his lap at the kitchen table with her bedtime book and looked up at him with the specific seriousness she reserved for her most important observations. Are you working for the nice lady now? He smoothed her hair back. For a little while. Is she going to be okay? He was quiet for a moment. She's smart. But even smart people get trapped when they trust the wrong hands. Lily laid her head against his chest. Then maybe she needs someone who tells the truth even when it hurts. Cal held her a little tighter. She does, he said quietly. We all do. And in a city of oil money and quiet betrayals, 2 people sat in separate rooms, one building an evidentiary trail, the other building back something like faith, neither one knowing exactly how close they were to the edge of what was coming, but both knowing they weren't stopping now. The elevator descended, and Cal felt the weight of the documents in his bag like a second heartbeat. The Cayman Trust files. Printed flash drive, backed up copy left with a lawyer he trusted, the only one he'd kept in contact with since the Meridian collapse. Equity transfer records. Offshore routing codes. And Derek's trustee signature, clean and unambiguous on a document that had been designed to remain invisible until it was too late to challenge. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt the thing you feel when you're holding the truth, and everyone who wants it buried finally knows you have it. Upstairs, Mara stood in front of the mirror in her private washroom looking at the woman looking back. She'd always read strength as composure, the kind that doesn't flinch, doesn't waver, doesn't admit to the dark. But the lines around her eyes lately told a story she'd been too busy to narrate. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Incoming call, Derek Strand. She watched it ring. She didn't answer. She needed facts. Not his voice. Not his reassurances. Facts. 20 minutes later, in her locked office, blinds drawn, Cal laid the documents on her desk. She read every page in silence. Her face didn't change, but the stillness in it, the kind that holds too much to express in any single expression, was louder than anything she could have said. When she finished, she looked up. Why the Cayman Islands? Because sunlight doesn't reach the accounting there, Cal said. Not the kind that matters. She tapped her fingers once against the desk. You kept copies separate from anything networked. Flash drive only. I've been down this road once before. She nodded slowly, then asked the question she'd been working up to for 2 days. Why are you helping me? You have nothing to gain here. If this goes sideways, you lose the consulting position and probably a reference. You're risking whatever you've rebuilt. Cal met her eyes without looking away. Because I've seen what happens when no one does. The silence between them was different after that, less professional, more personal. The kind of silence that happens when two people recognize they've survived similar things by entirely different means. Then Mara said very quietly, There's something specifically cruel about betrayal. It never comes from your enemies. Your enemies are honest about what they want. Cal didn't respond for a moment. Then, no, it comes from the people who learned your blind spots because you trusted them enough to show them. She looked at him, not the consultant, not the custodian, but the man behind both. Someone who had survived being discarded and chosen nonetheless to stand back up. That afternoon, Derek stood at the cafeteria espresso station watching the room without appearing to. His phone buzzed. No name. 3 words. She knows. Act accordingly. Derek set down his cup, adjusted his cuffs. The move was small, deliberate. A man recalibrating. It was time to change the board. That evening, as the floor cleared and the city settled into its evening frequencies, Mara reviewed security footage she'd requested from 6 months prior. She'd asked for access logs on the Compliance Archive physical entry records, USB activity login data. At 11:48 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, Derek Strand walked into the finance conference room, plugged a drive into the archive terminal, and sat for 9 minutes. When he stood, the folder permissions had been altered, the clause mislabeled, the trail buried. He didn't rush, didn't look at the camera. He thought she'd never look this far back. Her intercom crackled. Miss Donovan, Mr. Strand is here. He says it's urgent. She paused 1 beat. Send him in. Derek entered like a man who still believed he controlled the temperature of the room. He stopped near the window, back to her looking out over Houston with the familiar ease of someone reviewing property he plans to keep. You've been distant, he said. I wanted to check in before the summit. Make sure we're aligned. She waited. He turned slowly. Partnerships run on trust. If something's bothering you about the deal... She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a folder. A copy, not the originals. She slid it across the desk. Derek glanced at it. didn't touch it. "You've been busy," he said. "I have." Her voice was level, clinical. "Cayman shell entity. Your name on the trustee line. 6 months of metadata pointing straight back to you." She looked at him. "And security footage of you at the archive terminal the night the clause was reclassified." His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed controlled. "You think this wins you anything the board won't?" "The board will see what I show them," she said. She stood. "I know everything, Derek, and I'm showing all of it at the summit." Something shifted in him then, not fear exactly, the kind of cold calculation that surfaces when a man realizes the elegant exit has closed and he's deciding whether to break a window. "You don't want this war," he said, stepping closer. "You won't survive the press coverage, the board reaction. You'll be the CEO who hired a custodian to spy on her own COO." She held his gaze without moving. "He's not a custodian. He's a forensic accountant who wouldn't blink when the truth was inconvenient. That makes him more qualified than most people in this building." "You're making a mistake," Derek said. "I've made my share." She didn't move. "This isn't one of them." He stood there for a long moment, something working behind his composed face. Then he turned and walked out. No threat on the way out. Which was, she'd learned long ago, the most dangerous kind. Downstairs, Cal sat on a bench near the lobby's east entrance watching Lily demolish a juice box with methodical dedication. "You're quiet," she observed, wiping her mouth on her sleeve. "Just thinking." "Did she believe you?" Cal smiled barely. "I think she believed herself." Lily considered this with the gravity it deserved. "That's harder, huh?" "Much harder," he said. And in the lobby of Donovan Energy, with the city lights coming on like something that didn't know it was being watched, 2 battles prepared to begin. One in a boardroom, one in the hearts of 2 people who had stopped running from whatever they saw when they finally looked up. The morning of the shareholder summit opened with clouds that looked like bruises on the horizon. Mara stood in the corridor outside the boardroom, one hand resting near the door handle and not quite touching it. Inside, 12 of the most significant voices in the company waited, some loyal, some neutral, some already calculating their alignment. Her pocket held a flash drive. Her chest held a fire. The door swung open. "Miss Donovan." The board chair, Patricia Hale, offered a measured nod. "We're ready." Mara walked in. Derek was already seated at her right side, reviewing the printed agenda with the casual focus of a man at a routine quarterly. He looked up when she entered, smiled. Broad, warm, the kind of smile that had been quietly clearing rooms for 15 years. Before Mara could open, Patricia spoke. "Mr. Strand has requested to make an opening statement." Mara said nothing, sat, waited. Derek stood, buttoned his jacket, and addressed the room with the polished warmth of someone who'd given this speech a dozen times in the mirror. "I'll keep this brief." His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Over recent weeks, Miss Donovan has raised concerns about our upcoming merger agreement. I understand her caution. What I can't ignore is how those concerns have manifested." A measured pause. "She's initiated an unauthorized audit, granted full system access to an unvetted outside party, and done all of this in the final week before the most significant deal in our company's history." Several board members shifted. "Out of genuine concern for fiduciary responsibility, I move that we table the summit pending a temporary vote of no confidence in Miss Donovan's leadership." He looked at her, polite, cold, regretful. "It's not personal, Mara. It's about protecting the company." A stunned beat. Whispers branched through the room. Patricia looked to Mara. "Miss Donovan, your response." Mara stood slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move quickly. She reached into her blazer, produced the flash drive, and plugged it into the conference display port with the quiet precision of someone who has been waiting for this exact moment. The screen filled with documents, the Cayman entity registration, the equity transfer paperwork, the trustee signature, then a second file security footage. Derek, October. The archive room, the USB, the 9 minutes, all of it time-stamped and clean. The room went very still. What Mr. Strand calls paranoia, Mara said, I call 12 months of watching something move in the walls of my own company. She turned to face the board directly. Clause 8.4 was not a drafting oversight. It was placed deliberately to ensure that when this merger closed, controlling interest in Donovan Energy would transfer to an offshore shell entity registered in his name. Audible gasps now. Derek stood. This is completely... Sit down, Derek. Patricia Hale's voice cut through the room like a closed door. He sat. Mara stepped forward. I want to say something directly. She looked around the table. I didn't want to believe this. For 2 weeks I went over every alternative explanation I could construct. I looked for every exit from the conclusion these documents lead to. She stopped. But then someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose showed me the truth, and I couldn't pretend anymore that I hadn't seen it. She pressed play on the forensic audit trail. Access logs, email headers, modification timestamps, all of it tracing back to one account, one name. The vote was 10-2. Derek Strand was suspended effective immediately. Legal would handle the rest. Security entered quietly. Derek stood. His face was arranged into something that looked like indignation, but his eyes were the eyes of a man who had known this was possible and had bet against the odds of it happening this fast. He was escorted out without a word. The room stayed quiet for a long time after. Mara sat alone in the boardroom when everyone else had filed out. The screens had gone dark. Her thoughts hadn't. Later, outside the Meridian Tower's main entrance, Mara stepped out into a sky that had finally made up its mind to rain. Cal stood near the curb, Lily's hand wrapped around his finger. Lily was drawing in her notebook, apparently unaffected by weather. Mara stopped beside them. You were right, she said quietly. They never saw it coming. Cal nodded. Neither did he. He paused. That's usually how it works. The people who build the trap always underestimate the one person they didn't plan for. She looked down at Lily, who was coloring with complete focus. What are you drawing now? Lily held it up without stopping. A shield, rough and lopsided but deliberate. It's for people who get hurt trying to do the right thing, Lily said. Mara crouched down. That's a very important drawing. Lily looked at her with those eyes. My dad says sometimes people like you forget that you're allowed to be scared. Mara swallowed. Cal glanced at his daughter, then at Mara. And sometimes people like me forget what it feels like to be seen. The rain came down softly around them, the kind of rain that doesn't hurry. Mara straightened. I want to offer you a permanent position, she said to Cal. Strategic risk analyst. Full access, proper title. Off book, no longer on the record. You saw something no one else caught. That deserves more than a consulting rate and a borrowed office. Cal looked at her for a moment. You sure I'm not exactly the kind of hire your board is used to? She held his gaze. Maybe that's exactly the problem I've been having. He nodded slowly. All right. Then yes. That night in his apartment, Cal tucked Lily in and stayed beside her until her eyes dropped. On her nightstand sat the shield drawing, slightly smudged from the rain. He stared at it for a long time. Then he went to his laptop and began building the next thing, not a case, not a defense. A firewall made of transparency. A system for the kind of truth that doesn't need to be found in a trash bin at 2 a.m. From the top of the Meridian Tower to the smallest apartment in Midtown, something in Donovan Energy had shifted. Because the man the building never saw had finally been seen. And he'd changed everything. The next morning arrived with sharp sunlight and a different kind of tension. Cal sat in the corner office marked Strategic Risk Reyes, staring at two monitors he still wasn't fully used to. The mop cart was gone. His badge had his name spelled correctly for the first time, but something about Graham's Derek's exit didn't settle right. That smile as security led him out. That wasn't the expression of a man who had accepted a loss. It was the expression of a man repositioning. Across the floor, Mara walked into her office and stopped. On her desk, a black envelope. No return address, no handwriting. She opened it. Inside, a USB drive and a folded card. 4 lines. You think this is over? Let's ask the energy press what they think about your new consultant. What were you hiring and why? No signature. She called Cal in. He recognized the drive immediately. Same brand, same model as the one Derek had used in the archive room. He plugged it into an air-gapped laptop isolated from the network. A video loaded. Security footage from the executive break room, Cal and Mara, talking closely, both leaning over a document, the angle doing the framing. Another clip tighter. Her hand on his wrist for 2 seconds, reaching for a page. Both clips cropped just enough to strip the context. Just enough to imply what they didn't show. He's going to frame this as a scandal, Mara said, voice flat with controlled anger. CEO and consultant. He knows there's nothing between us, Cal said quietly. But he also knows how fast a story moves when the headline does the work for the truth. Within 3 hours, a business blog had the clips. Donovan Energy CEO's secret relationship with janitor turned consultant, conflict of interest or cover-up. Her phone exploded. Press inquiries. A board member texting her to ask if she needed operational space, which she understood to mean step back before you make this worse. She put the phone on the couch. Cal appeared at her office door. We knew he'd hit back. I thought he'd go after you, she said. Your credibility? Your history? I didn't think he'd turn us into a story. Cal walked in slowly. He's not going after either of us. He's going after trust. If people stop trusting your judgment, the board has a mechanism to replace me, she finished. He nodded. He doesn't need a coup if the room turns against you first. She looked at him. Something moved in her face, the exhaustion beneath the composure just briefly visible. I've spent 20 years with this company, she said. Every decision I've made, every sacrifice, it's woven into this building. And this is what it comes down to. A man who helped himself to what I built, and a rumor. Cal took one step closer, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and certain. It sounds like a woman who didn't flinch when power tried to rewrite her name. And a man who refused to stay on the sidelines just because the world handed him a mop and told him that was the limit of what he got to do. Mara's eyes closed for a moment. When they opened, they were steady. Okay, she said. Then let's give them something real to talk about. The next morning, Mara held an unannounced press conference. No board warning. No filtered statement from communications. She stood behind the podium in the Meridian Tower lobby, the Donovan Energy seal on the wall behind her, and she spoke directly. I want to address the footage that was released anonymously last night, she began. Yes, I hired a consultant with an unconventional background. Yes, he previously worked in our custodial department. And no, we do not have a personal relationship. She paused, letting the cameras settle. What we do have is this. She held up the Cayman Trust documents, the forensic signature analysis, the metadata trail. My former COO used a fabricated clause, a forged version of my signature and 6 months of quiet system manipulation to engineer a hostile internal takeover of this company. My consultant, who spent his prior career doing forensic accounting before his firm decided honesty was inconvenient, found it, documented, and brought it to me. A reporter raised her hand. Why not handle this internally? Why the public conference? Mara looked straight into the camera. Because truth handled quietly often dies quietly. and this one doesn't deserve to. After the conference, the energy in the building changed. Some people still whispered, but some people for the first time looked Cal in the eye when they passed him in the hall, not with the polite invisibility of before or the uncomfortable scrutiny of after the scandal. Just straightforward, like they saw him. Lily met him in the lobby after school. She ran the length of the marble atrium and held up a piece of paper with both hands before he could even crouch down. "I made you a certificate." He unfolded it. Crayon on white cardstock. Blue. In her largest, most deliberate letters, Truth Teller of the Year, for being braver than most adults. Love, Lily. He held it for a long moment, then pulled her in and held on. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered. She patted his back with small authority. "You stopped lying to yourself," she said. "That's most of it." Upstairs, Mara stood at her window watching them through the glass. Something shifted in her chest. Something she'd been careful not to name for a long time. Not hope for the company. Not the tactical relief of having survived a crisis. Something more personal, more fragile. The kind of thing that grows back slowly after you've spent years not watering it. One more moment. If this story has been worth your time, drop a comment below and tell me what hit hardest. I read them all. Now let's get back to what happens at the summit. The drive to Austin took 2.5 hours on a clear day. Mara made it in 2 flat alone, following a narrow ranch road off the highway to a low-slung property half swallowed by cedar and live oak. The iron gate at the edge of the drive was rusted open. The garden had been allowed to do what it wanted for a while. Cal had offered to come. She'd told him she needed to do this alone. She knocked. The door opened before the second knock. Vivian Holt was 61, silver-haired, with the posture of a woman who had spent decades in rooms that didn't want her there and had simply refused to adjust. She looked at Mara with eyes that had learned to read a situation before the other person finished their sentence. "Miss Donovan," she said. Not warm, not cold. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Inside, the house smelled of old legal briefs and cedar smoke. They sat across from each other in chairs that had seen harder conversations. "2 years ago," Mara said, "you left Donovan Energy quietly. Officially a health-related retirement." She looked at Vivian. "But your records were spotless. And 3 months before you left, our internal audit process changed in ways that created the exact architecture Derek used to hide Clause 8.4. Vivian said nothing. "He used your legal framework," Mara said. "The compliance shell you designed. He knew it perfectly because you built it, and then he moved you out before he used it." Vivian looked at the window for a long moment. "I told the board when I was still there that we were building a system with too many invisible rooms," she said finally. "That concentrated archive access without sufficient cross-check was a structural liability." She looked back at Mara. No one wanted to hear it. The efficiency argument was too appealing. "He threatened you," Mara said. It wasn't a question. Vivian stood crossed to an old filing cabinet in the corner and unlocked it with a key from her coat pocket. She removed a sealed folder, thick worn at the edges, like it had been opened and resealed several times. "He told me he had enough to destroy my professional reputation," she said, setting the folder on the coffee table between them. "Fabricated performance concerns. A story about a contract I'd allegedly mishandled. None of it true, but enough to spend 3 years fighting before I could prove otherwise." She sat back down. "So I walked away, took my pension and my integrity, and came out here." She paused. "And I've regretted it every morning since." Inside the folder, handwritten notes, copies of internal memos. A termination document drafted by Derek for Vivian dated 6 months before her retirement. The paper trail of a woman who had been pressured out of the room before the theft was complete. Mara's voice broke slightly on the next words. "You kept all of this?" Vivian looked at her evenly. "A lawyer never throws away the truth. We just wait for the world to be ready to want it again." Back in Houston, Cal reviewed the folder page by page, his hands moving the way they moved when the work came back to him fully, fast, and precise. "This is everything," he said softly. "The original template, the memos, the email where he instructs a junior staffer to streamline leadership at the top." He looked up. That was Vivian. Mara stood at the window. The summit was tomorrow morning. Live broadcast to shareholders across 6 states. Derek, suspended but not yet charged, had reportedly reached out to 3 board members in the past 24 hours. "They'll come for both of us," she said. "The narrative that I let an unvetted outsider into the system, that I was compromised, let them say what they say," Cal told her. "You didn't let me in. You listened." He said it simply, not as comfort, as fact. "There's a difference." She looked at him. "And if we fail," he gave a quiet, tired smile, "then we failed for something that mattered." The silence held between them clean, mutual, nothing in it that needed to be explained. Then a knock at the door. Lily's face appeared in the gap. "Dad, can we get barbecue? My brain is full of grown-up stuff and it needs to breathe." Cal laughed. "5 minutes, Lil." She nodded, then turned to Mara. "You should come. Bayou Brisket has this jalapeno cornbread that cures basically everything." Mara looked at her. Then slowly, "You know what, Lily, I think you might be the smartest person in this building." Lily beamed. "I know," she said, and disappeared. That night in the warm, battered corner booth of Bayou Brisket, the 3 of them sat together for the first time without a crisis in the room. Cornbread, brisket, sweet tea, the hum of the city outside the window. Lily ate methodically and with great seriousness. After a moment, she looked at Mara. "You stopped holding your shoulders so high," she said. Mara paused. "What do you mean?" "When I first saw you, you looked like you were carrying a refrigerator on your back. Now you don't." Lily took another bite. "Your eyes look like they can breathe now." Mara felt a lump form in her throat. Cal looked at his daughter with the specific expression of a man who knows he didn't create her intelligence, just did his best not to get in its way. As they walked out into the Houston night, Mara fell into step beside Cal. "You were right," she said quietly. "It needs a reckoning." Cal nodded. "Tomorrow it gets one." She looked up at the sky for a moment. "Are you scared?" He was quiet. Then, "I'm the most scared I've been since Meridian, but I think that means it matters." She said nothing. But she stopped walking for a half-second and looked at him in a way that said she understood exactly what that meant, because she was the same. The Crescent Hall was dressed for power. 300 shareholders, analysts, and press moved through its marble foyer in business. Best lanyards, bright phones raised the orchestral undercurrent of money in motion filling every corner. The LED screens above displayed the Donovan Energy logo in clean white against a deep charcoal field. At the center of it, behind the podium, Derek Strand stood like a man who had spent the last 24 hours rebuilding his confidence and was now wearing it like fresh paint. "Good morning," he began, voice rich and measured. "In any business, what separates the resilient from the fragile is the willingness to evolve even when evolution is uncomfortable." Applause measured attending. "Today, I'm proud to present the final terms of the Cascade Global merger, a deal that positions Donovan Energy as a Tier 1 player in the next decade of American energy infrastructure." Slides clicked behind him. Growth projections, synergy maps, streamlined governance structures. The governance model we've designed is lean efficient and built to move without the institutional friction that has historically slowed our decision-making. A pause with the weight of a deliberate choice. Without frameworks that no longer serve the company's future. At the back of the room, Cal stood near the media station, hands folded. 3 rows from the front, Mara sat with her back straight and her face unreadable. Beside the service door, Vivian Holt stood against the wall, ghost-like unseen for the first time since she'd walked away 2 years ago back in the room. Cal glanced at his watch. 9:46 a.m. Derek was transitioning into the approval vote when the house lights dimmed. A murmur ran through the crowd. The LED screens flickered. Then the security footage rolled, time-stamped, date-labeled clean. Derek in the archive room, the USB drive, the compliance folder, the clause. A second clip of him at a private terminal, the modifications loading beneath his hands. The room erupted in whispers. Derek turned toward the AV station. "Stop this! This is unauthorized!" His voice cracked once, then steadied. "This footage is out of context." Then the audio came through the speakers. His own voice recorded in a private call 6 weeks prior, provided by a source the press would spend 3 days trying to identify. "One signature. That's all it takes. And by the end of the quarter, Donovan Energy belongs to me in every way that matters." The hall came apart. Shareholders on their feet, phones raised, board members in emergency side conversation. The kind of eruption that a boardroom never fully recovers from because what was said can't be unheard. From the center aisle, Mara stood. "That recording is authenticated," she said loud enough for the room to follow. "The footage is sourced from our own security archive." She walked steadily toward the podium. "And for those who weren't aware, the merger clause my former COO just presented as a governance improvement would have transferred controlling interest in this company to a Cayman Islands entity under his personal trusteeship." Derek, white-faced, stepped toward her. "This is a setup, you're panicking. I'm protecting 40 years of legacy," she said, and took the podium. From the left side of the room, Cal stepped forward. "Independent forensic signature analysis confirms the clause transfer document contains a forged copy of Miss Donovan's signature," he said, his voice carrying with the flat authority of someone who has testified before and knows what that voice needs to sound like. "The analysis was conducted by a certified examiner. The original employment contract used as the signature source has been matched and authenticated." He handed the report to the lead board member. The room was dead still. Patricia Hale. The board chair rose slowly. "I move to suspend Derek Strand from all executive duties effective immediately pending a full legal investigation." The vote took 40 seconds. No one objected. Derek was escorted out. His face at the end had settled into something he couldn't control, a man who had moved power like a chess piece for long enough to believe he'd outgrown consequences, now discovering he hadn't. His empire of angles and mirrors crumbling in real time in front of 300 people who had believed in it. Outside the hall, cameras crowded the exits. Mara walked straight through them, flanked by Cal and Vivian, and didn't stop until they were half a block down, the sun warm on the back of her neck. She exhaled. "It's done," she said. "No." Vivian's voice was dry and certain. "The legal process is just beginning, but this," she gestured back toward the hall, "this part is done." Mara looked at Cal. Just looked at him. After everything. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "I pushed on a door that was already cracking. You walked through it." She smiled, tired and real. "You held it open when it started swinging back. That's the thing that mattered." Evening settled over the city. Cal came home to find Lily on the front stoop in bare feet, arms crossed, waiting. "You're late," she said. "Big day," he said. "I know. You saved the company." He crouched to her eye level. "No, I helped someone brave save it herself." Lily reached behind her back and produced a piece of cardstock rolled into a scroll tied with a rubber band. He unrolled it. Hand-lettered red crayon, carefully done. "For truth people only." She took it from him and taped it to the front door. "You're one of them now," she told him. He pulled her into a hug that said everything the words couldn't, his face against the top of her head, the city going on its loud, ordinary way all around them. And in an office 38 floors above Houston, a woman sat at her desk, not working, writing, in a small notebook she'd kept in a drawer for 3 years without opening. She wrote 3 lines. "Truth doesn't arrive with credentials. It shows up with evidence and a willingness to stand by it. All we have to do is be willing to look. She closed the notebook. For the first time in longer than she could measure, the looking hadn't cost her everything. It had given something back. The days that followed moved differently. The Meridian Tower felt like a space that had finally exhaled. Security guards who'd spent years performing neutrality were smiling. The espresso bar had a longer line because people were actually stopping to talk. And the atrium, which had always felt like a room arranged to impress rather than inhabit, started to feel just slightly like a place where people worked. Mara moved through it with her heels quieter than usual, coffee in hand. No armor she could name, but something different behind her eyes, the look of a woman who'd made peace with the specific terror of being seen. Cal appeared beside her at the lobby's east window, his new badge on his building ID with his name spelled correctly. "Strange seeing you without the board giving you the wall eye," he said. She smiled without turning. "They're still watching, just less like a firing squad." A pause. "You heading to the new office?" she asked. "Vivian's already set up at." She claimed the desk with the leaky window seal and said, and I quote, "Structural imperfections build character." Mara laughed. "That tracks." He turned to face her more fully. "I want to say something. I didn't come here to fix a legacy. I came here because my daughter needed new shoes and steady rent. That was the whole plan." He looked at her. "I never expected any of this." She met his eyes. "You stayed when it got hard. That's not small, Cal." "You stayed too," he said. The silence that followed was the kind that only exists between two people who have been through something real together and don't need to name it. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, Mara stood in her kitchen pouring lemonade. Cal leaned against the counter of her brownstone modest, tucked between sycamores in Montrose, nothing like the fortress executive residence he'd half expected. "You actually cook in here," he said, noting the worn cutting board, the dented pan hanging from the rack. "Occasionally, usually badly." She handed him a glass. "But I find it meditative." Lily had already claimed the backyard, attempting to negotiate with a mockingbird in the oak tree, using bits of granola bar as currency. They sat on the back porch, the afternoon slow and golden. "My dad used to sit out here," Mara said, "when he needed to stop being a lion for a minute." Cal looked at her. "What was he like?" She thought about it. "Brilliant, demanding, taught me that rest was weakness and stillness meant falling behind." She sipped her lemonade. "I spent 30 years trying to be him, and then one day I realized I'd built every wall he built and had none of his warmth." "My dad left when I was 7, Cal said. "Left behind an empty toolbox and about 15 years of questions." He looked out at Lily, who had apparently convinced the mockingbird to land on the fence post. "And somehow we both ended up here." She looked at him sideways. "Maybe that's what happens when you survive the thing you were told would kill you." He nodded. Lily spotted the photo on the bookshelf visible through the screen door, Mara as a child standing beside her father. Both of them stiff and a little uncertain, the way people are when they love each other and don't have the language for it. She brought it out. "Is this your dad?" Mara took the frame. "Yeah, that's him." Lily studied it. "He looks serious." A pause. "My dad gets serious too. Usually when the rent's due or when I say something really good and he doesn't know what to say back." She looked up. "But serious people need hugs more than silly ones." And then she wrapped her arms around Mara's waist. Mara went very still. Then slowly her hand settled on Lily's back. Her eyes were bright. Cal watched and didn't say anything. Because some moments are complete in themselves, and the only right response to them is to let them be. Before they left that evening, Cal paused on the porch steps. "I won't take the permanent position," he said. Mara looked at him surprised. "Why?" "Because I know myself." His voice was steady. "If I build a new safety net inside an institution, I'll start protecting the institution before I know I'm doing it. That's what happened at Meridian." I stopped hearing myself think. He looked at her. I need to stay the kind of person who tells the truth regardless of whose office he's standing in. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. But you'll come back, if it matters. If it matters, he agreed. Not for the title, for the truth. She looked at him. You know what scared me most through all of this? He waited. That I built 20 years of walls, and it took a man with a field notebook and an 8-year-old who reads people like picture books to show me what I was actually afraid of. She looked at the open window above the porch. I was afraid of needing anyone. He tilted his head. And now, she smiled just slightly, just real. Now I think I'll leave the window open. That night in the warm dark of Lily's room, Cal tucked her in and watched her drift. On the nightstand sat the truth teller certificate, slightly bent from being carried in his jacket. The shield drawing, the photo of Mara and her father that Mara had pressed into Lily's hand before they left. Lily held it loosely, almost asleep. She was little once, she whispered. Everyone was, he said. Do you think grown-ups forget that? He brushed her hair back. Sometimes. But the best ones remember just in time. She smiled with her eyes already closing. I think she's one of the best ones. He kissed her forehead. So do I. Outside, Houston kept moving traffic on the 59, a street musician 2 blocks over, playing something slow and off-key, the bayou, carrying light from the city on its dark surface. Cal stood at the window for a long time. He had nothing he'd had before all this started. Same apartment, same car, same daughter who outthought him daily. But tonight, that felt like enough and more. And across Montrose in a brownstone with a porch light that still needed fixing, Mara sat at a desk she hadn't written at in years and opened the small notebook. Not for strategy, not for analysis. She wrote slowly. Truth doesn't walk in with credentials. It comes holding evidence and the willingness to stay. The only question is whether we're ready to be honest with ourselves about what we're seeing. I wasn't. And then I was. That's the whole story. She closed the notebook, let herself sit in the quiet, and smiled in the particular way of someone who has finally stopped waiting to feel safe before they begin. Spring came slowly to Houston the way it always does, tentative, then sudden, then fully present before you finished noticing. One morning on the Bayou Greenway path near Discovery Green, the 3 of them walked in the kind of silence that holds nothing but understanding. Lily ran ahead in her yellow raincoat, jumping every puddle she found with the committed joy of someone for whom every puddle is its own argument for being alive. Mara watched her. She doesn't walk anywhere. She lives out loud, Cal said. I think she decided that's better than the alternative. They walked a few more steps. You could have disappeared after everything, she said. Just collected your consulting fee and moved on. No one would have blamed you. I thought about it, he admitted. What stopped you? He glanced at Lily, who was attempting to convince a pigeon to hold still for a portrait. She asked me if I liked who I was becoming. I didn't answer her. But then she showed me a drawing. He paused. Of me. Standing straight. Not hiding. And I figured I'd better start trying to deserve it. Mara was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sorry, Cal. She said it cleanly without performance. For every time I saw you and looked through you, for thinking the badge on your shirt told me something about your value. You showed me what I should have known already, that power doesn't have much to do with who people think you are. He looked at her. It was never about me. It was about her. He nodded toward Lily. About the world I want her to believe in. She nodded slowly. I know. They reached a wooden bench under a willow tree, its long fronds swaying in the river breeze. Lily climbed onto the bench, spread her arms, and declared it the court of big feelings. Mara sat beside her laughing. "And who's the judge?" Mara asked. "Me," Lily said with complete authority. "And I rule that you're both guilty of being brave. The sentence is you have to promise to stay honest even when it's hard." Cal looked at Mara. "I can live with that," he said. She nodded. "So can I." Lily jumped down and ran toward the duck pond, humming something tuneless and confident. Cal turned to Mara. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" "Every day," she said. "For the first time in my adult life, I don't have an answer. And I think I'm okay with that." She looked at her hands. She was holding the small notebook. "I used to think certainty was the point. Now I think honesty is." He glanced at it. "You still writing?" She opened to a page. Read aloud quietly. "We build our structures from ambition and forget to measure what they're built on until someone comes through with a flashlight and shows us the foundation. And then we have to decide whether to be grateful or just quietly fix what they found." He listened. "I'd read that," he said. She smiled. "I think I'll call it margins, because that's where the real notes always end up." They sat in the stillness that only people who have nothing left to hide from each other can share. Ahead, Lily's yellow coat caught the light through the trees. A thin rainbow was stretching across the far edge of the sky, blurred watercolor, improbable. "Look," Lily said, running back. "The sky's doing something." Cal scooped her up. She pointed with both hands, breathless and grinning. Mara reached over and touched Lily's cheek. "You're the bravest person I know." Lily wrinkled her nose. "I'm just a kid." "Exactly," Mara said. And Cal looked out at the city behind them, the flat Houston sprawl with its cranes and bayous and towers of glass, and he said barely above a murmur, "Hope is how everything begins again." As they walked back down the Greenway path, the light stretching long ahead of them, Mara slowed beside a small wooden sign planted in the grass. Painted on it, no attribution. "Integrity is messy. It's still worth it." She stood there for a moment. "You ever seen this before?" Cal shrugged. "Could be coincidence. Could be someone wanted to leave something honest behind." She looked at the sign, then at him. Then ahead where Lily was already 20 feet down the path, arms out narrating her own adventure to an audience of no one in particular. "I'm glad you didn't stay invisible," Mara said. He turned to her, this woman who had built an empire from nerve and drive and the specific loneliness of never letting anyone in, and had finally slowly chosen something different. "I'm glad you finally looked," he said. And together, one man who had been down to nothing and built back up from truth, one woman who had built everything and learned to hold it differently, and one 8-year-old who had known the whole time that honesty wasn't complicated, just hard. They walked forward into the ordinary, necessary work of a day that wasn't perfect, but was real. And that was enough. More than enough, it was a beginning.